The icy wind howled across the barren hills of eastern Afghanistan, carrying with it the smell of gunpowder and pine. It was the winter of 2008, and the platoon had been inserted by helicopter into the Hindu Kush Mountains 3 days prior, tasked with disrupting a known Taliban supply route. Among the 12 soldiers was a young woman named Maya Kozak. At 22, she was the platoon's newest member and designated ammunition hauler, a role that required immense physical strength but little tactical decision-making. She was short for the role, with a stocky frame built from years of competitive wrestling in high school back in Ohio. Her fellow soldiers, mostly men in their late 20s who had already done tours in Iraq, viewed her with a mixture of protectiveness and skepticism. She was there to carry the heavy boxes of linked 7.62mm rounds for the M240 machine gun and the extra magazines for the M4s, not to make calls or pull triggers. Maya didn't mind the grunt work. She had enlisted to prove something to herself, to escape the dead-end factory town she came from, and to follow the legacy of a grandfather who had fought in Vietnam. She carried the heavy packs without complaint, her face perpetually red from the cold, her dark hair tucked tightly under her helmet. The platoon leader, Lieutenant Daniels, a lanky officer from Texas, appreciated her work ethic but kept her on a tight leash. "Stick close to Corporal Reeves, Kozak," he'd said on the first day. "You see contact. You get down. You get the ammo to the guns. You are not a trigger puller. Understood?" The third day was the coldest yet, and they had set up a hasty observation post, OP, on a ridgeline overlooking a small valley. Below them, a frozen river snaked through the bottom, and on the opposite ridge, barely a kilometer away, they had spotted movement. Through the scope of the platoon's designated marksman rifle, they could see a half-dozen insurgents setting up a position, digging into the hard ground. They were preparing an ambush for a coalition supply convoy expected to pass through the valley the next morning. Lieutenant Daniels got on the radio, calling it in. They were too exposed to engage effectively from their current position. The order came down to observe and report. The platoon settled in for a long, cold wait. Maya sat behind a pile of scree, hugging her knees to her chest to conserve warmth, a heavy box of machine gun ammo resting against her thigh. And the wind bit through her layers, and she watched her breath turn to mist. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crackle of the radio. The sun began its slow descent, casting long purple shadows across the snow. That's when everything went wrong. They hadn't been spotted by the men in the valley, but by a different patrol moving along the spine of their own ridge. The first indication was the sharp crack of a bullet splitting the air just inches from Lieutenant Daniels' head, followed a second later by the sound of the gunshot echoing off the rocks. "Contact front! Ambush! Get down!" Reeves screamed, grabbing Maya by the shoulder strap and hurling her behind a larger boulder. The platoon erupted into controlled chaos. The M240 gunner opened up, sending a stream of red tracers toward the tree line where the muzzle flashes were coming from. The enemy was close, less than 200 meters away, hidden in the gnarled roots of ancient pines. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed herself against the freezing rock, the box of ammo digging into her stomach. This was it. This was real. She could hear the distinct thump of a grenade launcher and then the crump of an explosion close by, showering them with dirt and ice. The fire was accurate, disciplined. These were not raw conscripts. They were seasoned fighters. Reeves was firing his M4 in short, controlled bursts, yelling at the men to shift positions. Lieutenant Daniels was prone behind a rock, trying to get a clear sight picture with his rifle, but every time he tried to raise his head, a volley of shots forced him back down. The enemy had the advantage. They were higher up the slope and had clearly defined the platoon's position. Then came the scream. It wasn't a shout of warning, but a guttural cry of agony. Corporal Reeves, the heart of the squad, lurched backward, his rifle clattering to the ground. He clutched his shoulder, blood instantly soaking through his combat uniform and steaming in the cold air. A second shot kicked up dirt inches from his head. They had him zeroed. "Reeves is hit! I need cover!" shouted Doc, the medic, as he scrambled through the fire toward the downed corporal. Maya watched, frozen for a moment, as the scene unfolded in slow motion. Lieutenant Daniels made a move to drag Reeves back, but a burst of automatic fire stitched the ground between him and the corporal, forcing him to dive back behind cover. The platoon was pinned. The M240 gunner tried to shift his aim, but his angle was wrong, and he was running low on the emoji Maya had brought. "Where is that sniper?" Daniel screamed into his radio, trying to call for air support. "I need that shooter suppressed!" But the designated marksman was on the other side of the ridge, separated by a sheer rock face. He couldn't get an angle without exposing himself to the same deadly fire. The enemy sniper, or whoever their best shooter was, had them in a classic kill zone. They could pick off the soldiers one by one as they tried to move. Maya looked at Reeves. He was still conscious, his face pale with shock, trying to drag himself behind a rock with one good arm. Doc was pinned behind a boulder 5 meters away, unable to reach him. She looked at the ammo box. Then she looked at the M4 lying in the dirt next to Reeves. It had a scope on it, a standard ACOG, not a dedicated sniper scope, but magnified enough to reach out. In that moment, a strange calm settled over Maya. The noise of the battle faded to a dull hum. She wasn't thinking about regulations or her role as the ammo bearer. She was thinking about Reeves, the guy who had shared his last energy bar with her yesterday and told her she was doing a good job. She was thinking about the men shooting at them. Without a conscious command to her muscles, she moved. She rolled away from the boulder, grabbed the strap of Reeves's M4, and scrambled back, bullets snapping the air around her like angry insects. She slid into a slight depression in the earth, a natural gutter worn by rain and snow. It was shallow, but it offered a sight line down the ridge toward the trees. She laid the rifle on a rock, trying to steady it. She remembered her grandfather's voice in the woods of Ohio, teaching her to shoot squirrels with his old .22. Breath in, breath out, squeeze between heartbeats. She peered through the scope. The reticle was different from what she was used to, but the principle was the same. She scanned the tree line. There. A muzzle flash. She adjusted. A shape moved, ducking behind a trunk. She waited. "Kozak! Get down!" someone yelled. She ignored them. Her world narrowed to the circle of the scope. Another flicker of movement, a head peeking out to take a shot at the pinned-down lieutenant. The distance was maybe 180 meters, an easy shot at the range. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, and she saw the figure crumple, a clean hit. But there was no time to celebrate. Immediately, the fire shifted. Rounds started hitting the dirt in front of her depression. The enemy had spotted her muzzle flash. She ducked down, her heart racing. She had done it. She had actually shot someone. But the fire on Reeves lessened. She had distracted them. She looked back at Daniels. He was staring at her, his mouth agape, a mixture of fury and disbelief on his face. Maya didn't give him a chance to yell at her. She popped up again in a different spot. Another enemy fighter was trying to flank them, moving from tree to tree. She tracked him, led him just a hair, and fired. He went down. 2 shots, 2 kills. The training from her grandfather, the hours at the civilian range, the muscle memory. It all took over. The enemy fire became erratic, confused. They had expected to fight a squad of infantry, but now they were facing an unknown shooter who was picking them off with surgical precision. A third fighter made a run for it, trying to get closer. Maya dropped him mid-stride. "Fall back!" The shout came from the tree line in Pashto, though she didn't understand it. She saw the remaining fighters melting away into the trees, dragging one of their wounded. The silence that followed was louder than the gunfire. Ears ringing, Maya slumped against the rock, the rifle falling from her hands. Lieutenant Daniels was suddenly there, grabbing her by the shoulders, his face white. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted, but there was no anger in his voice, just shock. "Are you hit? Are you hit?" She shook her head, unable to speak. Doc was finally able to scramble to Reeves, Ott dragging him to cover and applying a pressure bandage. Reeves was alive, groaning, but alive. The firefight had lasted less than 10 minutes. When they swept the area later, with air support finally overhead, they found 3 bodies in the tree line, 3 confirmed kills by an ammunition hauler with a borrowed rifle. Maya sat on a rock, shivering uncontrollably as the platoon medic checked her for wounds. She had none, but something had fundamentally shifted inside her. She was no longer just the girl who carried the heavy boxes. She was the one who had picked up the rifle when the sniper went down. That night, huddled in a makeshift shelter as the wind continued to howl, Lieutenant Daniels sat down next to her. He didn't say much. He just handed her a warm cup of tea and a protein bar. "Reeves is going to make it," he said quietly. "And they're medevacing him at first light." He paused, looking at her in the dim red glow of a filtered flashlight. "You saved his life, Kozak. You saved all our lives." Maya just nodded, clutching the warm cup. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt hollow, exhausted, and scared. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see the faces of the men she killed. She saw Reeves, bleeding in the dirt. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that if she had to do it all over again to save him, she would. The ammunition hauler had stepped into the line of fire, and there was no going back. The unit would never look at her the same way again, and more importantly, she would never look at herself the same way again. The immediate aftermath of the firefight left the platoon in a state of tense quiet. The adrenaline that had fueled Maya's actions drained away, leaving her muscles aching and her mind curiously blank. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the wind, every distant animal sound, snapped her eyes open, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that now lay inches from her side. Corporal Reeves's rifle, which no one had thought to take back from her. The next morning was brutally beautiful. The sun rose over the distant peaks, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. A medevac helicopter, a massive Chinook, thundered into the valley, its rotors kicking up a blizzard of powdered snow. The platoon moved with practiced efficiency, carrying Reeves on a stretcher to the waiting bird. As they loaded him, he reached out with his good hand and grabbed Maya's sleeve. His face was pale, drugged with morphine, but his eyes were clear. He mouthed 2 words she couldn't hear over the roar of the engines, but she could read his lips clearly. "Thank you." Then the helicopter lifted off, tilting sharply as it cleared the ridge and disappeared, leaving them once again in the deafening silence of the mountains. With Reeves gone and the enemy patrol driven off, the mission shifted. They were to hold the position until a larger force could arrive to clear the valley. Lieutenant Daniels called Maya over to his command post, a shallow depression behind a large boulder where he had his maps and radio spread out. He looked tired, the weight of command etched into the lines around his eyes. "Kozak," he started, his voice low so the others couldn't hear. "I should have your ass in a sling. You disobeyed a direct order. You are an ammo bearer. Not a rifleman." Maya opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, but he held up a hand to stop her. "However," he continued, his tone softening slightly, You engaged a hostile enemy force with accurate fire. You suppressed their attack, and you likely saved the lives of every member of this platoon, including myself. I've been on the radio with battalion. They reviewed the audio of the firefight. They heard my marksman screaming that he couldn't get an angle, and they heard those shots coming from our position." He paused, rubbing his eyes. "They want to talk to you when we get back to base. For now, keep that rifle. You're our designated shooter until we get a replacement for Reeves." Maya blinked in surprise. "Sir?" "You heard me. Get some rest. We move out in 2 hours to link up with the QRF." He dismissed her with a nod, and leaving her standing there, holding the rifle that had changed everything. The next few days blurred into a haze of patrols and cold nights. The Quick Reaction Force, QRF, arrived, a full infantry company with armored vehicles that shook the frozen ground. They swept through the valley, engaging sporadic resistance, but the main enemy force had melted back into the villages and caves. Maya moved with her platoon, but now she was positioned differently in the formation. Instead of being in the middle carrying the heavy packs, she was on the flank, her eyes constantly scanning through the scope, watching for threats. The other soldiers treated her differently too. It wasn't hostility, but a newfound respect, tinged with a hint of awe. The M240 gunner, a burly sergeant named Kowalski, clapped her on the back one evening and said, "Kid, I saw you drop that first guy. Clean headshot. Where'd a hauler learn to shoot like that?" When she told him about her grandfather and the squirrel hunting, he just laughed and shook his head. "Remind me never to piss off a girl from Ohio." But the change wasn't all positive. She felt a distance growing between her and her former self. She had taken a life, 3 lives to be precise. The memory of the faces in her scope haunted the edges of her vision. She would be trying to eat a bland MRE, and her mind would flash to the split second when the first fighter crumpled. She felt no triumph, no patriotic fervor. She felt a profound and unsettling sadness, but she also felt a grim sense of duty. Those men had been trying to kill her friends. It was them or us. That was the math of war, and it was a math she could understand. And even if she couldn't fully accept the emotional cost. Back at the Forward Operating Base, FOB, a sprawling collection of tents and concrete barriers, the debriefing was intense. She was brought before a captain from the battalion intelligence staff who asked her to recount every detail of the engagement. He was particularly interested in the enemy's tactics and equipment. He didn't ask her how she felt about killing anyone. That wasn't part of the report. Then came the ceremony. A month after the firefight, the entire battalion was assembled in the hangar bay. The air was thick with the smell of JP-8 fuel and dust. Maya stood at attention in the front row, her uniform freshly pressed, her boots polished to a high shine. She felt incredibly awkward as the citation was read out loud, detailing her courage under fire and her decisive action in the face of the enemy. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, the battalion commander, pinned the Bronze Star with Valor device onto her chest. It was a heavy medal, and it clinked against her other ribbon. He shook her hand firmly, his eyes meeting hers. "You did good, soldier," he said, loud enough for the assembly to hear. "You proved that on the battlefield the hero isn't defined by their job title, but by their actions when the moment comes." The soldiers in the hangar erupted in applause, a thunderous sound that echoed off the metal walls. Maya stood there, ramrod straight, staring at the back wall. She felt a flush of pride, yes, but also a crushing weight of responsibility. She was now officially a hero, a symbol, but inside she was still just Maya Kozak, the girl who carried ammo and missed her grandpa. That night she sat alone on the hood of a Humvee, looking up at the impossibly bright stars. The desert sky was so clear you could see the milky swirl of the galaxy. Sergeant Kowalski walked by, stopped, and wordlessly handed her a cold soda from the PX. He sat down next to her on the dusty vehicle, not saying a word. They just sat there, two soldiers sharing the silence, the cold drink a small taste of normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down. For the first time since the shooting stopped, Maya felt a tiny sliver of peace. She wasn't alone in this. She was part of a tribe, a family bound not by blood, but by the shared experience of facing death and walking away. The Bronze Star opened doors Maya never expected. A few weeks after the ceremony, she was called into the company commander's office. She braced herself for another lecture or perhaps a new assignment hauling ammo for a different platoon. Instead, Captain Mitchell, a stocky, balding man with kind eyes, gestured for her to sit. "Kozak," he said, leaning back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "I've been looking at your file. Before you enlisted, you were a competitive shooter. State level in Ohio, right?" Maya nodded, surprised he knew that. "Yes, sir. Small-bore rifle competitions. My grandpa got me into it." The captain nodded slowly. "And your range scores in basic training were off the charts. The instructors noted you had natural talent, but you requested a non-combat support role. Why?" This was the question Maya had been dreading. She looked down at her hands, clasped in her lap. "My grandfather, sir. He was in Vietnam. Infantry. He never talked about it, but I saw what it did to him. The nightmares, the drinking. I thought if I stayed away from the trigger, I could serve my country without becoming like that." Captain Mitchell's expression softened. "I understand that, Kozak. More than you know." He paused, letting the silence hang between them. "But here's the thing about the Army. We don't always get to choose our role. Sometimes the role chooses us." He slid a piece of paper across the desk toward her. It was a request for transfer to a Scout Sniper selection course. "I'm not ordering you," he said quietly. "I'm asking you. We need people with your skill and your instincts. Not just people who can shoot, but people who think before they pull the trigger. People who feel the weight of it. The ones who don't feel anything are the dangerous ones." Maya stared at the form. The Scout Snipers were the elite, the shadows of the battlefield. They operated in two-man teams, often far from support, calling in airstrikes and taking out high-value targets with a single shot. It was a world away from hauling ammo. It was a world away from the simple life she had envisioned. "I need to think about it, sir," she whispered. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But Kozak, don't take too long. This opportunity won't wait forever." She left the office, the paper clutched in her hand, and walked aimlessly around the FOB. She passed the gym, where soldiers were grunting under barbells. She passed the chapel, a small tent with a wooden cross on top. She ended up at the makeshift memorial for the battalion's fallen, and a small garden of stones and plaques. She found Reeves's name there, though he wasn't dead. It was a spot for those wounded in action, a reminder of their sacrifice. She touched the cool metal of his plaque. That night, she called home using the satellite phone. It was a crackly, delayed connection, but when she heard her grandfather's voice, gruff and familiar, she almost broke down. "Grandpa," she said, "I got a medal." There was a pause. "I heard, honey. Your mother told me. I'm proud of you." She hesitated. "They want me to be a sniper. A real one. To go to the school." The silence on the line stretched so long, she thought they had been disconnected. Finally, his voice came back, softer than she had ever heard it. "Maya, when I was in the jungle, I did things, saw things. I carried that weight for 50 years. It's a heavy burden." "Being the one with the scope. You see the world different. You see the man you're about to kill. You see his face, his uniform, his humanity right before you end it. That doesn't go away. Her heart sank. This was the confirmation of her fears. But then he continued. But here's what I learned too late, honey. The burden is lighter when you carry it for the right reasons. If you're doing it to protect your brothers and sisters, to bring them home safe, then you can live with it. You can find a way to put the weight down when you come home. You're stronger than I was, Maya. You always were. Don't run from who you are. You're a protector. The words hit her like a physical blow. A protector, not a killer. A protector. The next morning, she walked back into Captain Mitchell's office and signed the papers. The captain just nodded, met a slight smile on his face. Good luck, Kozak. Make us proud. The Scout Sniper course was held at a remote training facility in the mountains of a neighboring state, far from the dust and heat of Afghanistan. It was a brutal, unforgiving crucible designed to break the weak and mold the strong into the military's deadliest weapons. Maya arrived with a class of 30 other candidates, all men, all seasoned infantrymen with multiple tours under their belts. They looked at the small, stocky woman with the serious eyes and the bronze star on her uniform with a mixture of curiosity and open skepticism. The first week was a blur of physical torment. Runs at dawn with heavy packs, log PT until their muscles screamed land navigation exercises that stretched through the night. The instructors, hardened master sergeants with the distinctive sniper tab on their shoulders, never raised their voices. They didn't need to. Their quiet, intense scrutiny was far more intimidating than any shouted order. They watched everything, how you moved, how you thought, how you handled stress. Maya struggled. She was strong from hauling ammo, but the endurance required for the constant grinding pace of the course was a different beast. On the third day, during a 12-mile ruck march up a steep mountain trail, her legs turned to jelly and she collapsed, unable to go on. An instructor, Sergeant First Class Hollis, a grizzly bear of a man with a shaved head, knelt beside her. "Get up, Kozak," he said, his voice flat. "I can't. Sergeant," she gasped, tears of frustration mixing with sweat on her face. "You can," he said. You didn't carry that ammo box through a firefight just to quit on a hill. Your body is lying to you. Your mind is stronger. Now get up." He didn't help her. He just stood there, waiting. She looked up at him, then at the trail disappearing into the trees ahead. She thought of Reeves. She thought of her grandfather. She got up. She finished the march, dead last, but she finished. That night, as she painfully peeled off her boots to tend to the blisters, she knew Hollis was watching her from across the camp. He gave her the slightest nod. It was the first approval she had received. The academic phase was next. Ballistics, wind calculation, range estimation, observation techniques, communications. They learned to read the terrain like a book, to predict where an enemy would move, to hide in plain sight. Maya excelled here, and her competitive shooting background gave her an intuitive grasp of wind and trajectory, and her quiet, observant nature made her a natural at spotting anomalies in the landscape. Her toughest challenge was the stalk exercise. They had to move across open terrain, camouflaged in their ghillie suits, shaggy coats of burlap and jute that turned them into walking bushes, to get within a certain distance of two instructors acting as observers without being detected. The first time Maya was killed within 10 minutes. She had moved too fast, creating a ripple in the grass. The second time, she took 6 hours to move 200 meters, inching along on her belly through mud and cactus. She got within the required distance but was spotted on her final approach when her rifle scope reflected the sun for a split second. Disheartened, She sat alone that night, picking burrs out of her ghillie suit. Hollis appeared out of the darkness, sitting down next to her without a word. They sat in silence for a long time. "You're thinking too much about the shot," he finally said. "You're so focused on the target, you forget about the environment. The sun, the wind, the birds, the bugs. They all tell a story. You have to become part of their story, not interrupt it." He left as quietly as he came. Maya chewed on his words. The next stalk exercise, she didn't think about the target at all. She thought about the ground beneath her, the way the wind moved the grass, the flight patterns of the birds. She became a rock, a log, a patch of dirt. She took 8 hours to cross a huge, barren field. When she finally reached the firing point, but she was so close to the observer instructors she could hear them complaining about the food in the mess hall. She could have reached out and touched one of them. She never fired the simulated shot. She just sat there, listening for 20 minutes, then slowly, painfully, extracted herself backward. When she got back to the start point, Hollis was waiting. For the first time, he smiled. It was a small, grim thing, but it was a smile. "You passed, Kozak," he said. "You're a ghost now." Of the original 30 candidates, only 12 graduated. Maya was one of them. At the graduation ceremony, as she was pinned with the coveted Scout Sniper badge, a crossed rifle and scope on a blue background, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Sergeant First Class Hollis. He shook her hand formally, then leaned in close. "So you've got the skill, Kozak," he murmured. "Now the real test begins. Don't let the weight of that badge crush you. Use it to protect. Remember why you're doing this." He stepped back and saluted her. She returned the salute, her hand steady, her eyes clear. The ammunition hauler was gone. In her place stood a sniper. Returning to her unit as a qualified sniper was a surreal experience. The soldiers who had known her as the quiet ammo bearer now regarded her with a different kind of respect, one tinged with the understanding of what she had endured and what she had become. She was assigned a partner, a spotter named Private First Class Thomas "Tommy" Lynn, a young man from California with a calm demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. He was new to the unit, but he had also just graduated from the sniper course. As they were a team of rookies, but they were rookies with a sharp edge. Their first deployment as a sniper team was to a volatile province in eastern Afghanistan, a region known for its intricate network of irrigation canals, dense grape huts, and stubborn insurgent presence. The role of a sniper team was different from regular infantry. They didn't clear rooms or patrol in large groups. They operated in the shadows, often moving at night, setting up hidden observation posts, OPS, for days at a time, watching, waiting, and reporting. Their primary weapon was information. Their secondary weapon was the long-range precision rifle. Maya carried the M110 semi-automatic sniper system, SASS, a powerful rifle that fired 7.62mm rounds. Tommy carried an M4 and a sophisticated spotting scope, then along with a laser rangefinder and a tablet for coordinating with drones and aircraft. They were a self-contained unit, reliant on each other for survival. The first few weeks were a trial by fire. They were inserted by helicopter into remote valleys, tasked with observing suspected insurgent compounds and supply routes. They would lie for hours, sometimes days, in hide sites carefully constructed from rocks and scrub brush. They learned to sleep in shifts, to communicate with hand signals, to urinate into bottles to avoid leaving their position. It was a test of endurance and mental fortitude far beyond anything Maya had experienced as an ammunition hauler. The silence was the hardest part. In the infantry, there was always noise. Engines, radios, chatter, the constant movement of men. As a sniper team, the silence was absolute. And they could hear the wind rustling the leaves, the distant bark of a dog in a village, the buzz of a fly landing on their face. They became hyper-aware of every sound, every scent. They learned to read the mood of a village by the behavior of its livestock. If the goats suddenly ran, something had spooked them. If the dogs were barking at night, someone was moving. Their first engagement as a team was not the dramatic, long-range shot Maya had imagined. It was a close, messy, terrifying encounter. They had set up an OP in a dried-up irrigation ditch on the edge of a village, hidden under a camouflage net draped with mud and straw. Their mission was to observe a compound believed to be used by a bomb-making cell. For 2 days, they had watched men come and go, documenting their patterns, counting their numbers. On the 3rd night, under a sliver of new moon, things went wrong. Tommy, who was on watch, nudged Maya awake. He put a finger to his lips and pointed into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing. Then she heard it. The crunch of a boot on gravel, very close. Someone was in the ditch with them, her heart hammered. They had been compromised. She slowly, silently, shifted her hand to the pistol at her hip. Through the darkness, she saw a shape, then 2, then 3. Insurgent fighters moving along the ditch, using it as cover just as they were. They were armed with AK-47s, their voices low as they talked among themselves. They were heading toward the village, probably to launch an attack. Maya and Tommy were hidden under the net. But it was a flimsy concealment. If one of the fighters stumbled into their position, the jig was up. They would be outnumbered, in close quarters with nowhere to run. Maya's mind raced through the options. She could open fire now, take them by surprise, but the noise would alert the rest of the cell and they'd be overwhelmed. She could stay hidden and pray. The lead fighter stopped. He was less than 3 meters away. He sniffed the air. He could smell them. The scent of unwashed bodies, the chemical smell of camouflage cream. He took a step closer, peering into the darkness, his hand tightening on his rifle. Maya knew the moment for hiding was over. In a single fluid motion, born of countless hours of training, she rose from beneath the net, her pistol extended. The fighter's eyes went wide in the instant before she fired twice, center mass. The suppressed shots were barely a whisper, but the sound of his body hitting the ground was like a thunderclap. Tommy was up beside her, his M4 spitting 3 round bursts at the other 2 fighters, who were fumbling to bring their own weapons to bear. It was over in seconds. 3 bodies lay crumpled in the ditch, the metallic smell of blood mixing with the dust. They didn't wait. Grabbing their essential gear, they abandoned the OP and melted into the night, moving cross-country to a pre-planned emergency rendezvous point miles away. They moved for hours, stopping only to listen, their lungs burning, their legs screaming. When they finally reached the safety of a nearby patrol base as dawn was breaking, they collapsed, exhausted and shaking. Tommy looked at her, his young face pale under the dust and camouflage cream. "We killed them," he whispered. "Just like that." Maya nodded, too tired to speak. She felt the familiar hollowness, the emptiness that followed taking a life. But underneath it, there was something else. A grim satisfaction that they had survived, that they had protected each other, that they had denied the enemy 3 fighters. She looked at Tommy. "We did what we had to do. We're alive. That's what matters." The mission continued. They were extracted by helicopter later that day and debriefed by intelligence officers who were eager for the information they had gathered on the bomb-making cell. The 3 dead fighters were confirmed as part of that cell. Maya and Tommy had disrupted an imminent attack, likely saving lives. Weeks turned into months. They conducted mission after mission. They watched compounds, counted fighters, called in airstrikes that obliterated enemy positions from miles away. Maya took shots that ended lives from distances that defied belief, 600, 700, once even 800 meters. Each shot was a clinical calculation of wind, distance, and trajectory. Each shot was also a life ended, a family shattered, a story cut short. She learned to compartmentalize. She built a wall in her mind between the Maya who had hauled ammunition and the Maya who now pulled the trigger. The wall wasn't impenetrable. Cracks appeared in the quiet moments, in the dreams that jolted her awake in a cold sweat. But it held. It had to hold, because the mission wasn't over. One evening, after a particularly tense mission where they had narrowly avoided detection by an enemy patrol, Tommy asked her a question that cut through the wall. "Maya, how do you do it? How do you not let it get to you? Hide the killing." They were sitting in a hide site, a small cave overlooking a valley, waiting for darkness to fall before moving to their extraction point. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful, and the beauty felt obscene, given what they did. Maya was quiet for a long time. She thought about her grandfather, about the firefight where she had picked up Reeves's rifle, about the faces she saw in her scope. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone, telling her she loved her and to be careful. She thought about the bronze star in her footlocker back at base, a symbol of a moment she still couldn't fully process. "I don't know, Tommy," she finally said, her voice rough. "I don't think you ever really do it. I think you just carry it. Some days it's heavier, some days it's lighter, but you carry it because the alternative is letting it crush you. And if you let it crush you, then you can't do the job. And if you can't do the job, more of our guys die." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "I think about the man I shot today. I wonder if he had a family, if he had dreams. But then I think about the patrol that was going to walk into that ambush he was setting up. I think about their families, their dreams, and I know I made the right call. It doesn't make the weight lighter, but it makes it bearable." Tommy nodded slowly, absorbing her words. They sat in silence as the last light faded, two soldiers in a cave, carrying their weight together. They had started the deployment as partners. They were ending it as brothers in arms, bound by a bond that few could understand. The end of their tour came suddenly. They were extracted by helicopter one moonless night, the blacked-out bird lifting them out of the valley and depositing them back at the sprawling FOB with its bright lights, hot showers, and the chaotic noise of thousands of soldiers going about their business. The transition was jarring. After weeks of silence and isolation, the noise and bustle felt overwhelming. A few weeks later, they were on a plane headed home. Maya sat by the window watching the desert shrink and disappear beneath the clouds. Tommy was asleep in the seat next to her, his young face relaxed in sleep, looking more like a college student than a combat veteran. Maya rested her head against the cold glass and closed her eyes. She was going home. The ammunition hauler who had become a sniper was finally going home. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she was not the same person who had left. The weight she carried was different now, heavier but also more purposeful. She had stepped into the breach when the sniper went down, and she had found not just a skill, but a calling. The question now was, could she lay that calling down, or would it define her forever?